This video contains major spoilers for The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. I mean, the game's 27 years old at this point, but you can never be too careful on YouTube. Ocarina of Time was my introduction to the Zelda series 20 years ago. I couldn't even get through the first dungeon when I was little, but I have played through it many times since then. As an adult, I wondered if the game still held up. Yes, it does. While there are some aspects that haven't aged very well, it is probably the most modern 27-year-old game I've ever played. I'm Ouroboros. Let's talk. Ocarina of Time starts us off like many other past Zelda titles, with Link waking up. In this iteration, he lives in Kokiri Forest, a village of children under the protection of the Great Deku Tree. His new fairy companion tells him that the Deku Tree wants to speak with him, and that begins your adventure. And that's pretty much it. Let's be honest, the narrative isn't much to write home about. It's serviceable, and I think that's how most Zelda games are. I know people have complained about Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's narratives, but the story of Zelda has never been great. Even when it became a bigger focus like Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword, that's never the real reason we played these games. I will say, the opening here is very whimsical. Kokiri Forest feels like such a safe place to be. Even though there are Deku Babas on the way to the first dungeon, the large amount of children and the cute little music here make it feel very homey. More importantly, the opening tutorial is fantastic. I'm going to be mentioning this a lot throughout the review, but I think it's important to keep in mind when this game released. Ocarina of Time came out in 1998. Gaming was still transitioning into the third dimension. Nintendo had already done well with Mario 64, but some other franchises were really hit or miss. Sega, Nintendo's main rival at the time, was flailing trying to bring Sonic forward, and while Sony had Final Fantasy VII in their back pocket, that game has aged really poorly. That's probably a controversial take, but I tried playing the original FF7, not the remake, a few years ago and just couldn't get through it. I wasn't a fan of traveling through static 2D images as opposed to 3D environments, but anyway, Kokiri Forest, and by extension, the Great Deku Tree, are your tutorial for not only the game ahead, but also for getting you used to playing Zelda in 3D for the first time. Again, something that nobody had ever done leading up to this point. Navi is your guide for this game. I know that people like to make fun of her with all the "hey, listen" memes that went around there for a while, but I really didn't find her to be that intrusive. Sure, when I'm off doing side content and not progressing the main story, she likes to chime in, but her whole purpose was to aid the player when they got lost. And there are times in the main story that the game doesn't do the best job of pointing you in the right direction. More importantly, however, is the introduction of Z targeting. This is one of the most revolutionary features in any game and has pretty much stayed with the series since its introduction. It's not even limited to the Zelda series. Most 3D action games have some sort of targeting system. Even some shooters like the Metroid Prime series use a lock-on mechanic. This was pretty much the birth of that whole mechanic, and all of the children in the forest get you used to using that system. I will say, it took a bit for me to get adjusted to using it. I'm so used to using the right analog stick to change the camera that I kept accidentally whipping out random items, but after a few hours, your hands adjust and it becomes second nature. You also get used to tons of different mechanics that will be used throughout the game, like all of the dungeon items that you'll find. The different uses for fire, navigating multi-level areas, pushing blocks and switches, and especially how combat works in this game. Learning how to use your shield both defensively with normal enemies, but also offensively with the Deku Scrubs will carry you through the whole game. Timing attacks is foundational to your success in combat, and the large Skulltulas that hang from the walls are the perfect example for this. Needless to say, Kokiri Forest and the Great Deku Tree are fantastic areas to get new players used to 3D traversal and combat. And nothing overstays its welcome here. Compared to, well, I don't want to say modern titles anymore because those games are well over 15 years old at this point. But Wind Waker and Twilight Princess's intros are painfully long. It feels like an eternity before you can finally get to the first dungeon, but I was done with the Great Deku Tree within probably 45 minutes of booting up the game. Granted, I've played Ocarina of Time a million times in the past, but you get my point. There's no filler here. It's straight to the point. That's something that I feel Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom do really well, but it's still worth noting. Finishing the dungeon does give you the lore drop of the goddesses. Din, Nehru, and Furore are recurring characters that come up in the backstory of a lot of the mainline games. And I believe this is the first time they were actually given names in-game. The story of the three goddesses would become the foundation for Hylian lore going forward for literal decades. And once you set out, the sense of adventure you get when leaving Kokiri Forest and saying goodbye to Saria is really great. You don't get much time to know her, but the parting does feel heartfelt. Like there's a mutual understanding that this must be done, despite both of your desires to stay home. But man, I can't imagine stepping out into Hyrule Field back in 1998. Oh, it must have been an amazing feeling. This fully realized, massive, expansive area just teeming with secrets is fully at your fingertips. And we can look back now and say it's just kind of a bit empty and also simultaneously not all that big. Which, yeah, for modern games, that's true. But this came out 2 years after Mario 64, which Nintendo couldn't figure out how to make a full world like this. They had tossed around the idea of doing something similar to the paintings in Mario 64, but were eventually able to achieve their vision. I had mentioned not liking walking through 2D images in FF7, and there are unfortunate instances of that in Ocarina of Time, most notably the path to the Temple of Time. It's rare in Ocarina, but it still makes it feel kind of out of place. Which may have been the point, given how the Temple of Time is kind of supposed to feel special, almost holy or ethereal, but I'm not a fan. Stepping inside for the first time is a grand feeling. Seeing the pristine interior and hearing the music play is top-tier atmosphere even now. While stealth sections are usually hated in games, I don't think that infiltrating your way into Hyrule Castle was really all that bad. There are even some tempting rupees sitting around if you feel confident in your abilities. This does lead us to our first meeting with the titular princess, and I enjoyed seeing just how much she acts like a child. Her mannerisms and dialogue scream naive little girl, and that's something that, even now, we haven't gotten. Zelda is always portrayed as either in her mid to late teens or early 20s. It's nice to see this different side of her. At this point, the game really opens up. I mean, there's so much you can do off the beaten path by the time you gain access to Death Mountain. There's so many optional goodies to collect. You can head over to Lake Hylia and talk to the crazy old man. You can start claiming rewards for all the golden Skulltulas you've collected at this point. You can head over to Lon Lon Ranch and get started on acquiring Epona. You get to explore the Lost Woods and eventually reunite with Saria. While I feel that Ocarina presents itself as a very straightforward, linear adventure, there is a lot of non-linearity in both how you tackle the side content and even the dungeon order once you've cleared the first 3 dungeons. Despite playing this game multiple times, I've never really tried a sort of sequence break for it. I'm sure it's interesting, and I really should give it a try at some point. Regardless, we do finally meet the Gorons on Death Mountain, and Darunia is such a goofy character. I don't know if it's because the game is dated as hell and you can basically count the polygons on his model, but I love the way he breaks out into dance when you play Saria's song for him. You can't really do a lot of character subtlety with the N64 graphics, but the over-the-top animations that come up from time to time always make me laugh in a nostalgic way. Speaking of non-linearity though, we see a bit of it in Dodongo's Cavern. You can kind of do the 2 sides of the main room in either order. It's nothing crazy, but the child dungeons are really just training wheels for when you eventually pull the Master Sword. I do wish there wasn't such an obvious hint about bombing Dodongo's eyes. It's kind of like in Skyward Sword's Ancient Cistern, where the game almost literally spells it out for you. Maybe they could have implemented a smaller version of that a few rooms leading up to the long bridge, and that could have been your clue to bomb the eyes, but nope, there's literally a sign there telling you what to do. However, I found this game kind of plays jump rope with giving you the solutions, respecting your intelligence, but also having some weirdly obtuse puzzle solutions. Like the whole process of getting into Jabu Jabu's belly. You need to find Ruto's letter in Lake Hylia and put together that she fed him a fish, which is how she ended up in his stomach, and then try to feed him a fish as well to eat you. I'm convinced the only reason I know what to do is because I've done it before. I can't imagine trying to put 2 and 2 together all the way back in 1998. I guess Zelda has always had some questionable progression puzzles. The original basically had you burning down every tree in the overworld to find random stairs. I guess Nintendo's first 3D attempt still had some growing pains. I know that Ruto is thought of as an annoying escort mission in the 3rd dungeon, but you don't even really need to keep her around for that long. You mostly just use her to press down some switches. She doesn't get attacked, and it's not like you have to wait on her to slowly walk from point A to point B. And yeah, she's spoiled, but wasn't that the idea? She's supposed to be a childish princess. That's one of the big things I've noticed with replaying Ocarina of Time all these years later. So many of the annoying things, Navi, Ruto, that damn owl for the most part, aren't really all that bad in hindsight. Well, except the iron boots, but we'll get to that. Of course, there are going to be things that don't hold up well 27 years later, but many things still manage to pique my interest. Combat is good for the most part, the level design in so many of the dungeons is superb, and even the cutscenes are well executed. For example, finally pulling the Master Sword is incredible. Really one of the best moments in the series. Seeing Ganondorf trick you and your subsequent aging, the catastrophic change in the market, meeting Sheik, it's amazing. It's so good, and the world shifting between the past and the future is one of my favorite parts of this game. It feels like so much has happened in those 7 long years. So many people were displaced from Castletown to Kakariko, all of the other races facing existential crisis. This Hyrule is one of the most dynamic and intriguing versions we've seen. Of course, that's one of the big aspects of this entry in particular. It deals with growing up far more than many of the other Zelda titles, but it's something that you definitely notice while playing. I think a big part of that comes from going back to Kokiri Forest first. Well, this is kind of the direction Sheik sends you, but I guess you don't technically need to do the Forest Temple first. Going back to your home is like going back to your old elementary or middle school. Everything is just so minuscule. Adult Link towers over everything here, and much like real life, it never felt small when you were a child, but when you return as an adult, you get a visual representation of your growth. In the case of Ocarina, you get a visual representation of all the time you've lost in the Sacred Realm. That's part of the tragedy of this game. What's not a tragedy, however, are the dungeons when you grow up. Man, Nintendo really started us off with one of the best in the series. I mean, everyone just loves the Forest Temple. It's so good. I mean, the atmosphere, the obscene amount of non-linear small keys you can collect hunting down the pose, the twisty hallway. The twisty hallway? I used to get so lost in this dungeon when I was a kid, and even now as an adult, I still find myself struggling to keep everything oriented. It's such a rewarding dungeon to play through, and it gives you one of the most useful items in the game, the bow. I found myself really appreciating the level design now that I'm older, and it went from being a dungeon that I was more or less indifferent to one of the most enjoyable experiences I've had in a Zelda game. I will say, aiming in this game is a bit of a nightmare. I don't remember it being this bad on the N64, but all of the items you have to aim are just so sensitive. Like, it feels like I barely move the control stick and Link is suddenly facing in the opposite direction. I know I'm a low sensitivity person, maybe I'm just a spaz, but my god, making small adjustments is really tricky, And why do the bow and slingshot not have a reticle? The hookshot has one. Why was this not standardized across items? It's a weird choice, and these two things combined together make things like the shooting minigames infinitely harder than they need to be. This is also more of an issue with the NSO version of the game, but trying to use the right C-stick to use items or the Ocarina is really a pain. This game was 100% intended to be played on an N64 controller, so issues like that or the sensitivity when aiming make certain actions harder than they really need to be. But moving on to the Fire Temple, I found myself enjoying the small platforming challenges here. It's not like they're super difficult, nor is it as fluid as playing a game like Mario 64, but just the sheer presence of lava or even some bottomless pits here and there add to the tension. It's like the difference between walking along the curb versus on a balance beam. Sure, in practice it's the same thing, but when the consequences of failure are amplified, it naturally causes you more stress. I do wish that the Megaton Hammer had more uses. It really is just used to whack switches that you can't activate with your own weight. It gets some use within the Fire Temple, but isn't really practical in combat nor in traversal. Compare it to some of the previous few items you've collected. The bow is fantastic both in puzzles and combat. The hookshot is used all the time. Even going back to Child Link, the boomerang is incredibly helpful for hitting flying enemies because you don't have to aim. It also gives you access to tons of new gold Skulltulas. And then there's the bombs, which are kind of the go-to secret passage opening item. The Megaton Hammer just feels so inconsequential outside of the Fire Temple, barring very few niche puzzles. That brings us to Ocarina of Time's most infamous dungeon, and potentially the most hated dungeon in all of Zelda, the Water Temple. Oh boy, the Water Temple. On the surface, I actually really like this dungeon. It's large, there are tons of keys to collect. The long shot, while kind of a boring upgrade to the hookshot, is a cool item. Unfortunately, like many people have already lamented before me, the Water Temple is marred by the decision to make the Iron Boots a piece of equipment rather than an item. Having to pause the game, switch to and from the Iron Boots, only to have to do it again 30 seconds later, absolutely kills the momentum of this dungeon. It also doesn't help that movement in water is slow as hell, and there are many times when you could miss a small key, so you'd have to go all the way back to one of the previous water changing spots, have to retread old ground again just to go back to where you needed to be, change the water level again, and finally progress the dungeon. There were times when I, a 27-year-old man, struggled to get my bearings, and I can't imagine how this would go for a kid back in the 90s. Now, I will say that I've heard some people complain about not knowing where the water level was going to go, but guys, come on. There are only 3 spots to change the level, and they directly correlate to where the water goes. That part is not hard to understand. Plus, this dungeon ends in a pretty lame boss. I mean, it's just an eye in some water. A far cry from the previous 2 bosses of Phantom Ganon and Volvagia. The only saving grace of this dungeon is the mini-boss. This is one of the most iconic incarnations of Dark Link, and the mini-boss room is one of my favorite areas in the game. It stands out for just how different it is compared to every other room. I did enjoy the ice cavern prior to the Water Temple though. I know some people don't like ice physics, but I've personally always really liked the box sliding puzzles that have been included in Zelda games. I wish there would have been a more challenging boss other than just literally a recolored Wolfos. And I think that it's odd that it gives you the Iron Boots. I mean, I know you need them for the Water Temple, but it feels out of place. I know that some of the developers have stated that they had to move some of the items around, and that the Ice Cavern was originally meant to be more of an ice temple, but still. It also makes the elemental arrows just feel there. You get the fire arrows from shooting the sun, you get the ice arrows from completing the Gerudo training grounds. They just kind of exist as extra goodies and are way too underutilized. I do think that the Shadow Temple and the well is the turning point for the dungeon design in this game. Before, Ocarina of Time felt like it was split up into 2 distinct chunks. Past and the future. But the bottom of the well furthers the time travel mechanic that was mostly in the background at this point. Sure, you had things like the magic beans or the sculptulas that you might have gone back to snag, but it never really felt like you had to bother being Child Link once you've pulled the Master Sword. It's great to learn the Song of Storms and create the fun little time paradox with the music box guy, but more importantly, you are pretty much required, unless you're doing some kind of challenge run, to do the bottom of the well as Child Link before entering the Shadow Temple as an adult. And let me just say, I've always hated these two areas. Not for any grand game design reason. I've never had a mechanical issue with them, but they have always creeped me the hell out. Every time I got to this point in the game, I would put it down for days or weeks at a time just because I couldn't get over this overwhelming feeling of unease throughout it. In hindsight, that's exactly what these areas were trying to accomplish. But I've never really liked the lens of truth as a mechanic. Like, oh, this thing is here, but you can't see it. But if you have this item, now you can. Like, does equipping one item to see things really change the gameplay all that much? Other than that, I actually think the Shadow Temple is a pretty well-designed area in terms of puzzles. It's incredibly linear, yes, but still fun to run through. While the Shadow Temple and the well are where the time travel mechanics have been leading to, the Spirit Temple is where they are fully explored. Rather than doing one dungeon as a child and one as an adult, it forces you into doing half the temple as a child and the next half as an adult. It really feels like the culmination of everything Ocarina of Time was setting out to do. The forest, fire, and water temples were traditional. They didn't stray too far from what was already the established Zelda formula. The Ice Cavern introduced many dungeons into the mix. The bottom of the well showed that there's still stuff to do as a child even after pulling the Master Sword. But the Spirit Temple is the full realization of mastery over both forms of Link. I'm also a complete sucker for light-based puzzles, and while they aren't too complicated, I love this dungeon. It has fantastic music, atmosphere, and even story with Twinrova and Nabooru. It also feels like it fully takes advantage of your entire arsenal since you're running through it with both sets of items. I like the boss fight, but much like the rest of the combat in this game, it's very passive. There's not much to do outside of waiting for openings. You don't have much agency, and that forces you to engage on the enemy's turn rather than your own. If you've gone out of your way to do the Bigoron trading sequence, you're actually rewarded with a weapon that can, in a way, bypass this limitation. Since the Bigoron sword has much longer reach than the Master Sword, you can kind of brute force your way through many fights. Spamming attacks is usually enough to break combat, and while that's a nice reward, its damage is more than enough for me. I would have preferred them to keep the previous combat balance, but give you that extra damage. It's a minor complaint, but I am very happy that the reward matches the effort and time it takes to complete the trading sequence. Around the time you get here, you kind of start to realize that the Temple of Time is your home base. It's the area that you go to the most since you're inherently connected to the Pedestal of Time. It makes sense that, after completing all the main temples, you would return here. Ganon's Tower is fine as a dungeon. I've never been the biggest fan of the let's revisit all the past ideas dungeons that we tend to get at the end of games. It's also weird that they didn't change the ice section to a water section in Ganon's Tower, but it's fine. However, the best part of the dungeon is the lead up to finally fighting Ganondorf. The array of stronger enemies as you climb, the slow crescendo of the organ, all of it is top notch, and I found myself giddy with joy experiencing it again. This part is so cool even 27 years later. Of course, the fight was disappointing. I mean, yeah, tennis is a classic, but they really could have come up with a better idea. The escape is cool, but I love the Ganon fight. For starters, he's just Ganon. There's no title for him, unlike every other boss. He's got a ton of health, the music is amazing, the atmosphere is perfect. It's such a dire moment, and you get to deliver the final hit. It's a satisfying conclusion to a narrative that, while not nearly as deep or complex as others I've played, is cathartic nonetheless. Despite the heroic tone of the entire game, the ending is bittersweet. You're taken back in time to when most of this never happened, and you leave the Master Sword on its pedestal. It's a foil to Ganondorf. Link has power, but chooses not to use it. You get to see the world more or less fixed in the credits, but that never actually ends up happening. And the game ends with you re-encountering Zelda for the first time. I know there was a phase when it was popular to hate on Ocarina. Like, yeah, there's some jank here and there are some questionable design choices, but we have to remember when this game came out. This game was a revelation back in 1998. It revolutionized 3D games and paved the way not only for the Zelda series, but the entire industry moving forward. So many games still use the targeting system pioneered in this game, and I think it has aged beautifully. People still rave about how amazing the Forest Temple is decades later. People still talk about how amazing the final boss is. Hell, Sheik is still relevant and still in Smash, despite not appearing in a mainline game since Ocarina of Time. This game is the foundation for the entire 3D Zelda series prior to Breath of the Wild. Many still regard it as the greatest game ever made. And you know what? I don't have a problem with that take. Its dungeons are superb, its characters, while underdeveloped, are still charming, its combat holds up, the bosses are fun puzzles, and I still enjoy replaying this game time and time again. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is an old game, but that doesn't make it any worse than its contemporaries. Thanks for watching.